All right, everyone. Welcome to my first lecture on Pluto in Capricorn. I'm going to be speaking about Pluto and Saturn and the shifting reality of our soul.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Now, one of the things that I thought was quite remarkable about this workshop is about 2/3 of you are new faces to me. So again, I thank you for showing up and checking me out. So I thought what I would do,
Thank you so much.
as I started putting my notes together for everything, I realized that with new people, and to really get us grounded, I needed to cover some of the basics of evolutionary astrology via the Jeffrey Wolf Green method. This is a method of astrology that I have been working with for about 25 years now. It has many times felt like it saved my soul asking those famous why questions. Little background on me. I am the Pluto and Virgo generation. All three of your teachers for this event are Pluto Virgos. My Pluto is in the 8th house, 2 degrees Virgo. I have a ton of Scorpio in my chart. And 7 out of my 10 planetary archetypes are either Sag or the 9th house. So I'm a little Scorpio, Sag, I don't know, powerhouse. So having an 8th house Pluto, which is the Scorpio house, having Sun, Mercury, Neptune, North Node, Midheaven, and Moon in Scorpio, of course I would go to this type of astrology. Why astrology? Soul-based astrology. So evolutionary astrology has some concepts that I think are very essential expressions of what we would call natural law. And natural law will show us that when we observe all the souls on the planet, not everybody's in the same spot. You ever notice you can have a conversation with someone and their eyes glaze over? Those are souls whose consciousness is not yet expanded to where you're at. Do you ever notice you'll have a conversation with someone and they leave you in a sense of awe and wonderment? Wow, I want to hear more from them. That is a soul whose consciousness is expanded even more than yours. We call these evolutionary states. And hear me, these evolutionary states, there's nothing about them that is greater than or less than. It's just that continual expansion of consciousness that exists everywhere. All of us in this room are more expanded in consciousness than the pioneers who settled the Front Range 100, 200 years ago, just by virtue of the space-time reality expanding consciousness. So these evolutionary states, quite briefly, are known as consensus, individuated, and spirituated. Consensus is more or less 7 out of 10 people on the planet. Any race, any country, any culture. 7 out of 10. Consensus, they consent. They cannot step outside of the space and time they were born in. They are extremely conditioned by the times they are born into. Consensus state, being the majority of the people, has a tendency to make all the laws and the rules and the conditionings. That the individuated state, approximately 2 out of 10 people, are always trying to bust out of, and I'll think for myself, thank you very much. I'll decide for myself whether or not astrology is the work of the devil. Approximately 1 out of 10 people on the planet are in the spirituated state. These are the souls that are recognizing universal, natural, timeless principles that work over all eons of time. Now, we also take these 3 major states and we subdivide them. I will not go into it right now, but as I'm working through the course of the next 4 days, I will give you some examples of the breakdown between consensus, individuated, and spirituated in their sub-states. In other words, in each of these 3 states of consciousness, there is a beginning, an intermediate, and an advanced, more or less. It's kind of like how I like to say it, learning how to take tennis lessons, ride a bicycle, play golf. When you first start out, you don't do too hot. Then all of a sudden you really get it and you go for it and you really want to try it. And eventually you really get to be a practitioner of it. You get to be pretty good at it. That's how we move through these different evolutionary states as we expand in our conscious and our awareness. So again, I will use examples for you as we go through these 12 archetypes. And by the way, I'm always open to questions, so I don't mind questions. Anybody got a question? Go ahead. I'm very good at repeating it. All that Sag energy? 9th house. Go ahead.
Would the Virgo and Pluto people be more advanced than those of us who have Libra?
No. No. Would Pluto and Virgo be more advanced? No. None of the 12 archetypes have any inroad over any of the other archetypes on consciousness. They are just 12 different expressions of consciousness that are all equal. And within the 12 archetypes, you can have consensus, individuated, and spirituated. Those 3 archetypes exist, or those 3 states exist in Aries, Cancer, Libra, Pisces. And your chart will not tell you the evolutionary state of the soul, nor will it tell you the gender. So one of the things that we really ground ourselves in evolutionary astrology is observation correlation. Any of you who are budding astrologers, you want to ask as many questions as the people or your clients want to hear back from you. And if they get uncomfortable with you asking the questions, we call it the environmental conditionings. What's your familial background? Were you raised by 2 parents? Did they stay together? What kind of religion or belief system were you brought up in? What kind of economic class were you brought up in? What do you do for a living? You ask those types of questions because that gives you that context or the environmental conditionings of that soul in question. And as you ask those questions, the process of evolutionary astrology allows you to start an intuitive discernment of where that soul is. Is that soul in consensus state, as Jeffrey used to say, asking, when will I have my BMW? Or is that soul asking, when will I find enlightenment? Consensus, spirituated, by those 2 questions. I know when we're first starting with astrology, we get very shy about asking our clients questions. And we think we're supposed to know it all by that little circle, and we got to play God and give it all to Him? No way. No way. I will spend almost the first quarter of a session with a client asking the questions that allow me to discern where their soul is coming from by their consciousness, that then allows me to shift my languaging to address these souls where they need to be spoken to. Good principle for evolutionary astrology. And you will notice when you go back to your rooms or throughout the day as you look at these handouts, I list these environmental conditionings in a couple of different places for you. So you can start to familiarize yourself with that. Next concept. In evolutionary astrology, we work with the planet Pluto as being representative of the soul. And soul, individual soul, when it manifests, has a dual desire nature. It has a desire to separate from that which it came from and to exist. And it has a desire to return to that which it came from and be one. Those dual desires to separate and return exist in each and every lifetime, in each and every state of consciousness. And we go through countless lifetimes exhausting the separating desires. What is a separating desire? I want a lover. I want a kid. I want $1 million. I want pretty clothes. I want a nice house. I want to have friends. Exhausting desires are anything and everything. What is the returning desire? I want to know that from where I came. Source energy, I like to call it. God got us. So we go through these multiple lifetimes, exhausting these separating desires, until finally that desire to know source energy starts to become more and more and more conscious. When we get to what we call the spirituated state, it is something that we are aware of. I want to know God. I want to know the answers. When we get to the point where we are a Yogananda, a Jesus, we are an avatar, what we call them, that's where they're in process of, they've been through many lifetimes exhausting all these desires. Been there, done that, been there, done that, been there, done that. How many times do you buy a piece of clothing, you love it, and you wear it 2 times, oh, I need another pair. I need a new piece, new pair of shoes, I need another piece of clothing. So eventually you get to the point where, I don't care what I wear. We do that in our beliefs. We do that in our conscious awareness of life around us and why we're here. Make sense for people? So this dual desire nature that's represented by Pluto. When you look at Pluto by its natal sign, Pluto in Virgos, that is the generation you were born into. And that represents on a generational level, everybody born with Pluto in Virgo, 1971-72 to 1983-84. All those souls who came in during that lifetime come from past lives of the Virgo archetype being emphasized. It's what we know. We gravitate to that stuff for security reasons, especially early on an unconscious level. The opposite sign is a generational lesson. The lesson for the Pluto and Virgo generation is Pisces. We've got to get out of our left brain, cup half empty, I'm not good enough, I'm not pretty enough, I'm not ready to stand up here and talk to all you guys. And we have to go over to Pisces and see the wholeness. One of the most basics of astrology in the circle is the law of polarities. You will see in your handouts I put out the law of polarities, the law of modalities, the law of the elements. There's 2 polarities, active, passive, masculine, feminine. 3 modalities, cardinal, fixed, mutable. Cardinal initiates, fixed sustains, mutable adapts, recycles. And then, of course, the 4 elements. And you will see that I list the 4 elements a little bit differently. I don't go fire, earth, air, water. I go fire, air, water, earth. Because from this spirituated state over here to this physical manifestation that we know as flesh and blood, in between it is the emotions and the mental body. All right? So for instance, one of the ways I like to give this example, when we have what we would label a dis-ease in this physical form, first of all, there's emotions behind it that are distorted, wounded, crystallized. Behind that is attitudes that are distorted. Behind that is beliefs. So whether we manifest an illness or we manifest consciousness with source energy, we start with the spiritual, we condense to the mental, we condense further to the emotional, finally we condense into the physical realm. And that connection from spiritual, mental, emotional, physical is kind of like a missing link that's not always talked a lot about in the New Age circles. When anybody goes body, mind, spirit, I go, where's the heart? Because mind and emotions are 2 separate things. You have your thoughts and you have your emotions. How many times do you try and work your way through some thoughts and your emotions come up and kick you in the butt? So they are separate. Okay? So back to Pluto by sign. Natal sign of Pluto, where are your souls coming from in your generation? Polarity point, where are your souls intending to evolve? Natally, in your own personal chart, where Pluto is in your individual house, That is where your own soul is coming from by way of your karmic past. The polarity point, the opposite house, is where your soul is intending to go. There are short variations to this. If Pluto is conjunct the south node of the moon, you are either in a relived lifetime, a fruition lifetime, or a mixture of the two. Pluto conjunct the south node, relived lifetime, fruition lifetime, something that you've developed in the past that you're now going to blossom with, or most likely combination of the two. When Pluto is conjunct the north node of the moon, you are meant to continue evolving in that natal house that Pluto and the moon are conjuncted in. The polarity point doesn't come in to access. It can still be there, but it's not as strong. Now, again, this is very brief, very fast. If you want more information, there's plenty of it out there. Our website is evolutionaryastrology.net. There are books that are out there on evolutionary astrology. Jeffrey's Pluto, the Evolutionary Journey of the Soul, Volume 1. He has a Volume 2 on relationships. You can find more information. I've only got 2 hours, so I don't have time to really go in a lot of detail. But I wanted us to have this understanding of what is the soul. It's an immutable consciousness that comes in and out of form, lifetime after lifetime, experiencing this physical form, experiencing these emotions, these mental attitudes, these beliefs, and through the experiences, evolving itself. When we look at Pluto in Capricorn, it entered Capricorn in 2008. It will be there from 2020 until 2023-24. So Pluto takes 248 years to go around an astrological chart. Never makes it in a lifetime. When you observe it moving that slowly, can you just naturally observe, correlate how Pluto through signs just represent generational waves that we all go through? So the souls that are born with Pluto in Capricorn are coming in with these Capricorn lessons we're going to be discussing over the next few days. These are the lessons that their soul has been working on in past lives that they're going to come in with some identification to. Those of us born in earlier generations, and by the way, on day 2 and day 3, I'll go into detail as we go through the Cancer through Cancer through Sag archetypes. I'll go through the generational things more in day 2, day 3. But those of us born in previous generations, we're already here. We're already relating to being a Pluto in Leo. Patricia said this morning, you guys just don't want to grow up, do you? And then us Pluto in Virgos, well, can I work hard enough? So we're already here. But as we go through these transits of Pluto, as it keeps evolving, we evolve. And the most natural way to observe us evolving is through these Pluto transits through the sign. So anybody notice any economic stuff go on when Pluto went into Capricorn in 2008? Oh, I'll talk about that one day 4. I'll go into the economic stuff a lot on day 4 with Capricorn, Aquarius, and Pisces, okay? So we noticed Pluto in Capricorn, didn't we? I had a husband who said, wow, honey, if there was ever a time for anybody to recognize astrology works, it's Pluto in Capricorn. I really can tell it. But Pluto in Capricorn is combining the archetypes of Pluto and Saturn. Another basic concept from evolutionary astrology is that the astrological archetypes are archetypes of consciousness. And they're living archetypes. They change through time. And an archetype is a principle, a theme, a modality that has a multitude of expressions. One of the things I like to say about an archetype is it can be distorted or it can be naturally expressed. A distortion of the archetype of Capricorn is the end justifies the means. I'm going to get my goal. I don't care how I get there. I don't care who I step on getting there. Whereas a natural expression of Capricorn would be, wow, if I help others, it will help me as well. If I find some type of social base to this community, it will help all of us. Leroy, what's that ringing noise? Just stopped. There was a ringing noise. A high-pitched noise coming from over there. It stopped. Did you do something? He's got his headphones on. He isn't hearing it. It's not showing up on the tape? It might be something. It stopped. I'll tell you if it starts again. Okay, I'll tell you if it starts again. So when I got to get my thoughts back again. When we're working with these archetypes, the 12 astrological archetypes, Aries through Pisces, the houses, Aries, first house, and its ruler Mars are the same archetype. Taurus, second house, Venus, same archetype. And Jeffrey Green always used to say, if you ground yourself in the 12 archetypes, then you can make astrology work for yourself. Because Aries and first house, same archetype. All right? A lot of your, what we would call traditional astrology, wants to make the signs in the houses different. They're not. When you really start looking at it as principles of consciousness, you will recognize that they are interchangeable. And we'll work with that over the course of these days, all right? So the archetype of Capricorn is the same archetype as the 10th house, and it's the same archetype as Saturn. So when Pluto transits through Capricorn, you're taking Pluto and Saturn and you're putting those two together. And what I'm going to watch and have enough time with is I'm going to put Pluto, Saturn in the first house, combines with Mars. I'm going to put Pluto, Saturn in the second house, combining it with Venus. I'm going to put Pluto, Saturn in the third house, combining it with Mercury. Get the point? Get the principle with that? Okay. So again, these 12 archetypes of the zodiac are basically principles in consciousness. And so consensus Capricorn, individuated Capricorn, and spiritual Capricorn are different things. Consensus Capricorn, if I get enough money in my bank account, I'll be secure. Individuated Capricorn may be experiencing no money in the bank account, and I'm not secure because the individuated state of consciousness is transferring security from outside of self to inside of self. And when you get spirituated, that security mechanism really transfers to the inside. So spirituated Capricorn doesn't, need as much money or can have all kinds of money and shares it. Wants everybody to be prosperous. It's not a me versus you anymore. They're recognizing when we all prosper, I prosper. All right? Again, I'm going through things fast. If you really want the details, I got a correspondence course, 3 segments, hours upon hours upon hours, breaking the 12 archetypes into details, breaking all of the Pluto formula, as we call it, into detail. DVDs back there too. So I'm trying to get some grounding stuff for us all right? So you will notice in your handouts that I did some of my little Pluto Virgo left brain stuff. There are some pages that start after you get through some of the planetary ingresses and basics. You will get to some handouts that say Pluto and Saturn, the soul and its changing reality. Okay, the ring started again. Not left. Battery hearing aid, okay. Terry, do you wear a hearing aid?
Sorry?
Do you wear a hearing aid?
I am. Is it whistling?
We think that might be your hearing aid.
Okay.
It's gone now, but if it comes up, we might note it. It'll look like this in your handout. Maureen, you have a question?
You didn't define spiritual Capricorn. You went consensus and individuated. You didn't do spiritual.
Spiritual Capricorn. Spiritual Capricorn will actually try to help others economically prosper. Spiritualized Capricorn will help others become autonomous and independent. I'm actually going to go into that a little bit. Well, I'll go into that throughout the next 4 days. But spirituated Capricorn is recognizing that all this material stuff is not enlightenment. And it can take it or leave it. And many times, when evolved souls can get to the point where they can take it or leave it with these manifestations, the manifestations are naturally there. And they're naturally giving and sharing. You know, what we're working with here is a lot of distortions over the last 5,000 years from natural law. We used to live very inclusively in our tribes, giving, sharing. What one had, all had. And over the last 5,000 years, those principles, matriarchal principles of giving, sharing, and inclusion have been placed by patriarchal principles of taking and exclusion. Probably kind of familiar with that stuff. And so one of the things about evolutionary astrology is we're trying to recognize more natural principles versus their distortions. So I'll get into that some more for you. So as you look at these handouts, again, you can flip through some of the first ones. When Pluto entered Capricorn, you know, it's a 248-year cycle. The last time Pluto went into Aries was 1822, the beginning of what we would know as the Industrial Revolution. In the early 1820s, we actually had a Uranus-Neptune conjunction. And when that came along, that's when we really started with all of our industrialized stuff. And we really you know, life changed. Imagine, we had Uranus and Neptune conjuncting each other, and steam engines and railroads and airplanes and all that stuff that have come along since then. You know, Uranus was in Aries. It was a brand new collective cycle. Pluto in Capricorn is 3/4 of the way around the circle from that Aries point. So Pluto in Capricorn is a natural resonance to what we will call a crisis in consciousness to the original Aries point. And we will find as Pluto goes through Capricorn over these next 15 years that we are having a crisis in consciousness over our materialism, over how we are going to relate to each other in respect to different cultures and countries. We had, the dates are in your book. Here, let me look it up for you. If you find that Pluto and Saturn handout, if you flip to the next page, the top of the next page, I have the 2 previous Pluto and Capricorn cycles. And you will notice that one of the cycle before, this one, Pluto was in Capricorn, 1762 to 1777-78. What we know most famously for that is at the end of that cycle, we had the birth of the United States as a country. And that came at the end of that Pluto and Capricorn cycle, when they were tired of the haves and the have-nots, when they were tired of the taxes from England, they were tired of the control from England. I'll say more to that, but go back one cycle before that. You go back to Pluto and Capricorn cycle before that, and that was 1515-16 to 1532. What happened 2 Pluto and Capricorn cycles earlier is we had what came about was the creation of what we call the Protestant work ethic. Yes. And what happened in human consciousness back in those days, there was still a belief that your fate was determined by a God outside yourself before you even came here. So when you were born into a certain class. You may have been a have, you may have been a have-not. But you were born into a certain class, and you couldn't really change it much. And again, there was this collective consciousness belief that your fate was already determined by God. We had not expanded in consciousness for the most part to be able to be aware that we could make choices and affect that. And so what came about during that time period, guess when the first black slaves were shipped over to England and the Americas and Europe? 1526, Pluto and Capricorn. So that's when we really, that 2 Pluto and Capricorn cycles ago, that's when we really started working with human beings as the laborers that we could control. And we could make the haves, the social elites at that time, usually the royalty, okay, that they could actually control that on large mass scales and have, 100 servants that would, take out their little piss pots. So you understand what I'm talking? Can you recognize this, Pluto and Capricorn, in those early 1500s? And all the slavery? The estimates are somewhere between 10 and 30 million blacks were shipped out over a 200-year period from native Africa. So we've all probably been there. We were all probably on those ships. But that is the consciousness that came about in that Pluto and Capricorn cycle in the early 1500s. When we got to one cycle ago, which was 1762 to 1777, those later 1700s, okay, the steam engine was created in that time period. And what came about in mass consciousness at that time period was that we could replace machines with humans. That's when that Pluto and Capricorn cycle in the late 1700s, that's when we started, the technology started creating all of these mechanical machines, and life was going to get easier. And the masses thought that they wouldn't have to do the work anymore because the machines would do the work for them. So now here we are in the current Pluto and Capricorn cycle, and we've got all these machines. Do we work less? That's the mass consciousness in that consensus state that has us enslaved to our machines. And not that they haven't made our lives easier. The other thing that came along, 2 Pluto and Capricorn cycles, people didn't read the Bible back then. They just were told what it said. And the printing press came along, and all of a sudden people could read it for themselves. I mean, imagine the expansion of Pluto and Aquarius that follows Pluto and Capricorn, with all of the conformity to compress and condition. So this is just some brief ideas to just give you some of these broad cycles. Question? I'm going to go with her first.
Well, it seems to me that one of the crises in consciousness now does still have to do with the workforce being controlled.
Yes.
it's a very different level of being controlled, but the haves have certainly twisted us and put us into a type of slave mentality. It's certainly not the original stuff,
Yes, yes, yes. Her comments were that we're still into that enslavement to the work thing, and rightly so. And part of the reason why I've shared these last two cycles is to help you recognize, especially on economic reasons, we're really enslaved in those areas into believing that we've got to work hard to be able to make it. You know, we've got to work harder, not smarter. And we have to learn how to work smarter, not harder. You know, and so that you're very right in that. And I had another thought, but it flitted out, so it'll come back later. And Suya, question?
So I'm just having an aha moment. So Pluto in Capricorn right now, the structure of our reality, Saturn, Pluto, in the 10th house of economy and our work, it's actually crumbling and changing.
Yes.
So that, to me, just shows the power of Pluto and evolutionary astrology for even consensus society. It's not all about the greed anymore and my money. People, like with the natural disasters that are happening, people are having to give to others. They're so touched on a soul level. So it's just so, this Pluto in Capricorn, and it would be because it's so reality-based, is just really helping the consciousness on a soul level transform a little bit and evolve because of all these natural disasters, because of the destruction of our financial system. And in a more positive way, I hope that this will help us all the souls evolve.
Yeah.
So it's just a comment.
Yeah. Could you hear her okay? What she's touching upon is the polarity point of Pluto in Capricorn. The polarity point is Cancer. So the generational lessons of this cycle of Pluto in Capricorn is to return to community, to return to family, to return to what EA would call the matriarchal principles of giving, sharing, and inclusion. And so what's happening right now as we go through this crumbling of the economy, younger and older generations are moving back in together. The extended family is coming back together. The young ones can't afford to live on their own. They're moving back home with mom and dad, which, you know, is not necessarily good or bad. But in the broader principles, can you see how it represents that community that needs to come about again? And where we are at in consciousness right now on the planet is recognizing ourselves as a global community, whether we are a Christian or a Muslim, whether we are an American or a Canadian. That's the growing pains that we're going to see ourselves growing through over the next few years. Now, there was another question over there first. Glennis?
Do you know what Pluto was in when the slaves were emancipated?
What was Pluto in when the slaves were emancipated? Emancipated? You know what? That happened in 1860s, 1865. That would have had to, I think it was Pluto in Gemini is going to be my guess, or Pluto in Cancer. Somebody got a ephemeris on your... Taurus. Pluto in Taurus. Pluto in Aquarius is always the rebellion to the conformity and conditioning of Pluto in Capricorn. So when we had the American Revolution in the late Pluto in Capricorn cycle, that Aquarian rebellion started before Pluto went into Aquarius, which we will probably see, whatever we're going to be rebelling against with these crumbling Capricorn realities, we will do the rebelling 2012 through 2015 when Uranus makes 7 waxing squares to Pluto. And I'm going, hallelujah, because we need it to wake ourselves up, to bring the changes about. Because the other thing that's going to be happening is next year we have Neptune going into Pisces for 12, 13 years. And that can be a time of spiritual disillusionment, spiritually checking out. You know, you remember these last few years, everybody noticed the shift of Uranus and Pisces to Uranus and Aries. You know, the 2009 Uranus and Pisces, it was kind of hard to find our sense of well-being and optimism. Uranus moved into Aries, and you notice the shift in consciousness that happened with that. Mark will speak more to that. I have to watch my time, and I didn't check to see what time I started, so I have 20 before I am an hour. All right, that helps. So you're getting some of these massive, I was talking about Pluto and Capricorn on a generational level, and it's Cancer polarity. So just a couple of tidbits for you to kind of get your own brains going with how this works on a massive scale. Again, day 4, I'll talk more about the economic stuff and some of this Pluto and Capricorn stuff that we're going to bust out of. Okay? Now, I want to talk about this archetype of Saturn Capricorn in the 10th house. This is the archetype of social maturation. You've got all the notes, you've got plenty of notes in your book. It is the archetype of the individual maturing and finding its identity in society. It is the archetype of self-responsibility, accepting responsibility for your actions, accepting responsibility for who you are on your individual soul nature, where you are in your life as compared to others. It is the archetype of self-determination, deciding to do something about our life, with our life, in our life. The archetype of self-determination and becoming productive in society is also that archetype we would call the career. So Capricorn following Sagittarius. Sagittarius is the principle of philosophy and cosmological understandings and trying to figure out what life is all about. Once we figure out those philosophical understandings, then we want to turn around with Capricorn and make rules out of that, make laws out of that. Make it, because when you bring any group of people together, if you don't have a set of customs and rules and laws, you have anarchy, you have chaos. So any group of people will create customs together in order to function better as a unit. So Saturn Capricorn in the 10th house is that functioning of the unit as a whole. And so as an individual, it's how we function in that unit. I'm hoping that if I stand far enough away, it goes away. It is. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I will stay far enough away. So again, you can kind of look through some of these archetypes. Another common one with the archetype of Capricorn is the need to be secure. And of course, what will happen is it has a tendency to represent outer security, the accumulation and management of all of our resources, and via the Cancer polarity, we are only as outwardly secure as we are inwardly secure. Cancer is the archetype of emotional self-reliance and inner security. So you can see how these polarities work. None of the signs works without its polarity. You can't know Capricorn without knowing the polarity of Cancer. So I also wrote down in your notes just a few of the distortions of the Capricorn archetype we've already been touching. The haves versus the have-nots. The ends justifies the means. It can also be this archetype of not wanting to make the effort. There are the souls who are going to go out there and get theirs before anybody else does, patriarchal me versus them. Then there are the souls that just give up in a sense of futility and they don't make an effort to be self-responsible and do something with their life. So that's also a distortion of the Capricorn archetype. I will repeat these so many times through these 12 archetypes that I don't want to go into them in much detail. That's why I've written them down for you, so that as we go through the 12 houses, we can look at some of these basic Capricorn archetypes as it goes through the first house, second house, etc. Okay? I also wrote down for you some of the Cancer polarities to the Capricorn archetype, which you can see as representing some of the lessons that we have to learn as an individual basis, that we have to learn as a collective basis as well. Okay? So, questions with what I'm saying in regards to this? Yes?
What about the 10th house being what you came to give back to the planet? That's how I interpret the 10th
Oh,
house.
definitely. You can definitely look at the Capricorn archetype, because the Capricorn archetype traditionally represents the father, the masculine energy, that ability to grow up. What do we look at from that archetype? As we learn how to be socially mature and we move into positions of authority in society, in our familial unit, we learn how to help others. That's that Cancer polarity coming back to Capricorn in a mature way. So yes, Capricorn can definitely be what we give back. Very healthy expression of Capricorn. So, Ansuya, go ahead. I'll repeat it.
Talk loud. So we're using Saturn as interchangeable with the Capricorn archetype. So Saturn, the Lord of Karma, gets played out in the 10th house. And its polarity point is Cancer, the moon, the memory of what we've done in the past. I'm just bringing it back to the evolutionary perspective.
Yeah.
So I wanted to know if you wanted to comment on Saturn as the Lord of Karma.
We can. That's more of a traditional view of it. And you know, here's the thing. What happens is because Capricorn, ruled by Saturn, okay, is yin cardinal earth, okay? It's going to be the results of the efforts we put into life, okay? And so if we don't put the efforts in, the karma comes back that way. If we put the efforts in, the karma comes back more positive way. So when I look at Saturn as the karma lord, it's that effort. It's the Capricorn is the accumulation of the efforts we have put in. This lifetime, previous lifetimes. You remind me also of one of the other archetypes of Capricorn, and that's why I'm kind of moving through some of these pages, and that's the archetype of guilt. Any society will come together and create its standards of right and wrong conduct, and when we deviate from those standards, we have a sense of guilt. But the question becomes, who decides the standards of right and wrong conduct? Most of the time it's consensus society that are trying to herd us in and control us and make us all conformed at the expense of our individualization. So Capricorn, Saturn in the 10th house will also be the archetype of what we call conditioned guilt. Conditioned to feel guilty because we're not going to go out and get the job that our father had. We're not going to run the business, the father business that's been coming up for 2-3 generations. We're supposed to do that. We're supposed to run the factory. And here's the son who wants to go off and be an artist and feeling guilty because he's not conforming to the conditions of the family. So the archetype of Capricorn will contain the archetype of guilt. Many times it will be conditioned guilt. When there is what we would call the archetype of natural guilt from past lives, there will be a deep sense of feeling guilty that we cannot move ourselves beyond. If we look at the example I just gave of the son who doesn't want to run the factory, he wants to be an artist, that's guilt through conditioning, and he can look at that guilt and move beyond that. But if that same person was guilty of destroying this father's business in a past life, he'll have an inherent sense of guilt that he cannot get beyond. And that's the one that's it gets a little tricky to touch into that. And that's something, here's something else that comes along with this archetype of Capricorn. But before I say that, one of the exceptions to this rule is that good old Pluto and Virgo generation. You know, there's a lot of religious conditioning on the planet. And the Pluto and Virgos are known to either fall into that sadistic or masochistic extremes. So a lot of those Pluto and Virgos will come in with this conditioning guilt that I'm the bad one. And they had nothing to do with it. Okay? And so when the Pluto and Virgo generation are a lot of Virgo or 6th house or Mercury aspects, you've kind of got to check that out. Is it conditioned guilt or inherent guilt? All right? But one of the other things that I wanted to say about this archetype of Capricorn is that when you are, Capricorn is such that we have to get in touch with space-time reality. That principle that we come into this physical form, we're in it for a while, and we leave it. Mortality, space-time reality, okay? What will happen when we're in this physical reality, and we probably all notice this, I can probably explain it generationally easier. As Pluto went into Capricorn, and all of this economic crises hit, what happened is there was this sense of involution. What am I going to do? What's wrong? How can I make it in the world? The Capricorn archetype asks us to do self-examination and self-reflection. And that is the yin, the polarity of active, passive, yang-yin. The passive yin side of Capricorn internalizes. And so it gives us self-examination, self-reflection, what we call involution. So what's happening on a broad level? We see our economic forms involuting, falling apart, crumbling. And the masses then go, what are we going to do financially? How are we going to work these economic cycles? How are the have-nots going to learn how to, you know, have what the haves have? and so there, so within Capricorn, because again, it's yin cardinal Earth. So the yin and the cardinal, when you start putting those together, that creates an active internalization, an active inward reflecting. What's wrong with my reality? Why don't I like my life as I've put it together? And I'm as far back as I can get. Okay, we'll handle this one in the break. All right, is this making sense for everybody? So what will happen then when Capricorn causes us to do the involution? I'm going to try over here. I don't know if it's me. I think it might be the battery. Okay. So what will happen then is that involution, or that self-reflection, self-examination, it gets us to get to one of the core principles of Capricorn 10th, 8th house, which is, what about my reality is not working that I have to change? So it moves that cardinal energy forward and starts the evolution of cardinal. Remember the three modalities, cardinal, fixed, mutable? Cardinals always change. Most of the time change is 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Change represents insecurity because we're moving forward into the unknown. All right? And so that cardinal energy sometimes has to have a deep, deep inner reflection before we can have the courage to change. Because remember those Saturn crystallizations? We all heard that word. I got all my stuff. I got my family. I got my job. I got my life set up the way this is supposed to be. But it's not working for me anymore. It takes courage to leave a career, especially in this economy. It takes courage to step outside the family if you don't want to do it anymore. You know, it takes courage to change all those Saturnian structures that we have created. So now can you understand Pluto and Capricorn coming along and just going boom? You know, we all know Pluto, death and rebirth, the great transformer, you know, whether you want it or not. And so you put it in Capricorn, and all of these structures have to crumble. It's natural for us to go inward and reflect so that we can figure out what needs to change with our reality, both on an individual basis and on a collective basis. And as we go inward and do all of that reflection, what comes for us is new awareness, what we would call self-knowledge. Oh, this is how I've put my life together. Oh, this is what I've done that's created this situation in my life. That self-responsibility, the self-knowledge and responsibility for our own actions. Oh, if I don't want this, I maybe have to do something else. If I don't want all of these partners up and leaving me, I may have to change some of my actions of the kind of partners that I choose. Libra square Capricorn. All right? This making sense? Anybody else questions on this Capricorn archetype? Pluto in Capricorn. All right, here's what I want to do real fast because it's morning. We all got our morning liquids. We got to have a tape change. 3 minutes. Fast, okay? Because I got to keep us on time. All right, everyone, welcome back. One of the reasons why I gave you a quick little break, well, first of all, it's morning, all our liquids. But also, at the end of this next hour, Patricia will be back, and we're going to do a circle and open the mandala. And so when I get done lecturing, if you can, don't rush off right away. Head straight to the back, and we're going to all hold hands and bless the mandala. So, and Patricia will give you some instructions on that. All right, so I'm going to have one more hour to go to the 3 examples. Before I do that, I glanced at my notes, and there's a couple more archetypes that I want to talk about that are included in the archetype of Capricorn, Saturn, 10th house. The first one is probably very easy to recognize, and that is judgments. When any group of people are coming together, and with our environmental conditionings, familial, cultural, economic, religious, we all, again, have these customs, norms, rules that create what we call these standards of right, wrong conduct. So just like we can feel guilty if we're not abiding by those standards, there are also, especially in the consensus state, those who create those standards who judge when you deviate from those standards, or judge because you are different race, different culture. But we can even go into the individuated and spirituated states and see the principles of judgments as well. There are inner judgments, judging ourselves because we are not where we thought we'd be by the time we were 45 years old. You know, there's judging ourselves for a variety of reasons. And one of the things that we do with this internalization process of Capricorn when we examine ourselves and examine our life is we look at the standards of conduct that we have accumulated over many lifetimes. And Patricia will work with that stuff a lot more in the afternoon. But we can look at the accumulation of judgments from lifetimes. And those are unconscious judgments that can take some efforts to unfold. You know, oh, I had a past life where I stole a loaf of bread, so I hold myself in judgment of always feeling like, you know, I'm a bad person. You know, you were starving. You hadn't eaten in 3 days, and you stole a loaf of bread. You know, but you can internalize a judgment over a past life experience that you hold unconsciously. You can also hold judgments in the current life based upon the environmental conditionings of the family you were born into. of the culture and social customs you were born into, of the beliefs that you were born into, and then of all the economics and resources beliefs that you were born into. My example, I have a third stage consensus father, and my whole life I heard the statement that women don't know how to manage money. And it took me a while. I still work with that one. You know, so here I am, you know, holding that judgment within myself. You know, so the moment I make a mistake balancing the checkbook, you know, I beat myself up 10 times harder than I have to. You know, so simple example for you with judgments. So Pluto through Capricorn is going to be a natural time period for us to all examine these judgments that we carry around within us, accumulated or re-imprinted in this current lifetime, and the past life imprints of judgments. Now, the other principle that I wanted to talk about with the archetype of Capricorn is what we call the blocking effect. And you'll see some notes in your handouts on it. And this is where, because Capricorn is an earth sign, and it's a sign of manifestation, and it's the culmination of all the things we want to manifest in this lifetime. When we are blocked from being able to manifest these certain things, it leads us to examine, why can't I get the job I want? Why can't I have the lover I want? Why can't I have the material things I want? Whatever it is. And so this blocking effect will come about for 2 reasons. One of the reasons is that it's either our own internalized judgments, you know, our own internalized actions, old attitudes, old judgments, old stuff that we're clinging to, that gets us afraid of really moving forward. So we have to examine where we are our own saboteur. Is that the word?
Yep.
All right. And then the other one is, the second reason, it's a kind of a couple of things. It could be a been there, done that. It's not what's highest and best for our good. It's not germane to the reality of the life that we're living. I am not going to be a Hollywood actress at this moment. That's not the way my life is going. That's not the context of my reality. All right? So again, one of it is is old imprints, attitudes, stuff we're clinging to that we use to self-sabotage. The other one is it's not that meant to be. It's not germane to the context of our own reality. And having to accept the reality of the space-time we were born into. Under the broad concept of multiple lifetimes, if I really want to be a Hollywood actress, I could come back and try it. You know, in that broad concept of multiple lifetimes, you know, we do have free choice. But when it comes to a specific lifetime that we've manifested into, there's a time-space continuum that goes on from the soul on a consciousness level as well. And so we don't always jump from this end of the spectrum to that end of the spectrum within a single lifetime. There sometimes has to be certain knowledge built up, certain desires built up. There has to be certain efforts made to get there. So when we are running into what we call the blocking effect of being able to manifest things within our life, it does require us to then do that internal self-examination, to do that internal reflection, to figure out whether or not it's something that we're putting the brakes on with, or something that's just a fantasy or not in our soul's highest and best good in coming here this lifetime. Does that make sense? That's a big principle that we're all working through. Glennis, question?
Would you say as a generality the house we have Capricorn on the cusp of would block things?
Would I say the house the house that Capricorn's on the cusp of is where you could have blockages? You betcha. And we're going to go through that example 12 times. Any other questions before we start right in on that one? Okay? All right, so I decided because every day I want to start with some general information for you, I came to the reality that in 2 hours I wouldn't have a lot of big example for actual charts, okay? Tomorrow I actually want to use a chart because I have a very good example. But today I'm probably going to have to go kind of fast through this. So I'm going to create theory charts or theoretical examples and just throw out the ideas for you, okay? All right, as we work through that. But what I'm going to do each day for you now in working with these archetypes is we're going to start with Aries, which is, again, interchangeable with the first house, okay? And so we're going to look at Pluto in the first, Pluto and Capricorn in the first house. So we're going to look at it as if we've got a Capricorn rising. And but Pluto's still in my 12th, so I'm going to be the last example. But we're going to look at Capricorn on this 12th house cusp and Pluto actually in that first house. And to make it easy then, we're going to look at Uranus in the 4th house. We're going to look at Saturn up here in the 10th, okay, as we look at this, all right? Question?
Just, do you use Pluto if it's really close to the cusp, but in the 12th, do you use it as in the 1st or in the 12th?
You can. That's a good question. How many degrees do we allow to be along the cusp? Evolutionary astrology is usually pretty close, only 1 or 2 degrees. So Pluto has to be within 1 or 2 degrees of approaching this ascendant to call it on the ascendant. Question? Is it?
Are we talking natal or transit?
Natal. Well, both. Well, no, natal. Okay, let me clarify here, okay? All right? Evolutionary astrology works with all house systems, all right? You don't have to have a specific house system. Many of us use Porphyry, and that's where most of your house systems have the vertical line, the midheaven nadir, and the horizontal line, the ascendant, descendant. Most house systems, those 4 cusps are the same. Where house systems differ is the succedent houses in the middle of the quadrants. In the Porphyry system, however many degrees is in that quadrant, you equally divide it by 3. Very easy to understand, very simple to do. Your Koch, your Placidus, they have more complicated tables of finding it. Okay? But you can use your own house system. It's not relegated to a specific house system. Okay? In the natal chart, we usually are kind of, a planet has to be within a couple degrees on either side of a house cusp before you start interchanging it. For most of us, once you get 5 degrees into a house cusp, you're in that house cusp. If you're 5 degrees away from the house cusp, you're in that other house. Okay? Same thing with the signs. If something's got to be 0, 1 degree, you can go back to the 29 degrees of the sign before. If you're at 28 or 29 degrees, you can feel that 0 or 1 degrees of the next sign. But 5 degrees on 25 degrees in the sign, 5 degrees in the sign, you're in that sign. Okay? Evolutionary astrology works with the process. But when you're only working with 30 degrees of a house and 30 degrees of a sign, you can't allow 10 degrees to be the cusp. There's not enough degrees. Okay? Does that make sense for whoever asked that question? With that? By the way, in the mornings I'm real focused to just get the information out. But I'm here all day, all afternoon. You can ask me your little technical details that I come out with if you don't quite understand it. I'm very happy to answer questions for you. Okay? All right? So now, these examples are going to be Pluto transiting through the houses, the Pluto transits, okay? Hold on, we got one more question.
Does that whole cusp thing, does that affects the nodes placement too?
Yes.
Okay.
Does the whole cusp thing affects the nodes of the moon? Yes. Keep in mind that the mean relative motion of the nodes is backwards. So 29 degrees of the north node is the beginning of the sign, the beginning of the cycle. 1 degree of the nodes is the end of the sign and the end of that cycle. The moon's nodes move backwards 90% of the time. So, with our first example, we're going to look at this Pluto in Capricorn transiting through the first house. So we are going to be taking the archetypes of Pluto and Saturn, which is Capricorn, and combining it with Mars. Remember that energy, with our bursting out? All right? What do you think is going to happen if you have a Capricorn rising and you got all this Saturnian control that you are trying to keep on all of that Aryan energy, and then here comes Pluto in Capricorn, and it just busts everything wide open to the smithereens. With Pluto in Capricorn transiting that first house, it is a complete death and rebirth of reality. Who the fluff am I? What's happening in my world? Where's everything going? And what this is going to symbolize is there has to be a complete starting over of this soul's reality, which means that everything they've accumulated up until that point, no matter what age they are, no longer works. Everything is just fallen apart, and Pluto doesn't always have a tendency to do it real nicely. It really makes sure, it's the Plutonian effect, to make sure that there's nothing lingering around that your security Capricorn is going to go back to. Okay? And so what will happen with this Pluto transit is extreme insecurity. Aries, the bursting forth, Mars, first house. Extreme insecurity. Because think of the baby coming out of the womb. That bursting forth of energy that goes in gazillion directions, and you don't know where you're going to end up. And Pluto transiting Capricorn, my God, I got to hold on to my resources because all the resources are just crumbling. And so, this is a very insecure spot, and it's very hard to let go of the resources here. It's very hard to let go of the reality that this soul has accumulated to this point. And not only that, you're going to have this first quarter square from Uranus hanging out here in Aries, okay? Uranus in Aries is going to be in that fourth house. That's going to add to all the emotional insecurities that this soul is going through. All right? And then you've got Saturn up here in the 10th house in Libra, probably got all the relationship stuff crumbling. So can you see how this T-square right here is just affecting this whole reality for this soul? Now, I'm going to go through some ideas and examples very fast in regards to this, okay, so that I can get through all three. But you're welcome, again, to raise your hand. Don't mind me talking fast. Buy the tapes. When you have this Saturn up here in Libra, okay, and this is the ruling of the midheaven, if this soul's had any karma in past lives with other people where there has been any abuse of resources, these people are probably going to be back in their life having something to say about it. The karmic wheel, the pendulum's going to swing on that karmic wheel. And that would hopefully cause this person to really go in and do some self-examinations, fourth house, of why this is happening and getting some Uranian insights into what is happening here. Now, the blocking effect that we were talking about of really going forward and being able to manifest something in this life, in this case, this Pluto in Capricorn thing, this is a soul that's going to have to operate very spontaneously in their life at this moment. Capricorn risings, I want to plan it out, and I want to know where it's going to be, and I want to know how we're going to do it. I'm a Capricorn rising. I want it all laid out right like this, and I now have to operate off of my instinct, my gut. Oh my God, do I do this or do I do that? And this is going to be creating all this anxiety here, and we're going to be wondering what everybody else is thinking about us also. And so we just literally have to go into the first house transit, Pluto in Capricorn. It really would be helpful if you could go off and be quiet and be alone. The first house has to do that because it is a way for them to get an understanding of who they are versus all this energy coming at them from everybody else.
Hi, this may not come up very often, but I know a 97-year-old woman who is going through this.
I'll repeat. I'll repeat.
A 97-year-old woman who's going through this, who's mainly bedridden at this time. I know that's not what you're going to see very often, but maybe you have a few words about that.
Oh, nice example. She knows a 97-year-old woman who's bedridden, who has Pluto transiting her first house. Now, I would tell that woman to be, I would invite her. I wouldn't tell her. Feeling my energy coming out. You'd never know all this stuff was in me, would you? My husband does. He's going, I think I'm going to vacate for a while, honey. I would invite her, okay? Because obviously 97 years old, Pluto transiting that first house, she's going to be having the death of the body and leaving the body. I would invite her to really be going back over her emotional childhood and really going back all the, I mean, it's just a reflection on life, basically, for her. And going back to any birth memories that could be coming up to see if there would be something to be healed. Going back to childhood memories to see if something to be healed. If she has children, going back and doing any forgiveness stuff with them. Going back and looking at anything she's done in the world with other people and seeing if there's any reflections that she would want to do. I'm a real 7 archetypes in Sag are the 9th. I'm a walking cliche and philosophical statement. One of my favorites is Ho'oponopono, the Hawaiian forgiveness prayer. 4 steps. Number 1, I love you. That's too hard to say. I care about you as a human being. Number 1, I love you. Number 2, I am sorry for XYZ. Number 3, please forgive me. Number 4, I forgive you. I would tell her that she's going to have things in her life with people, the realities in life that didn't turn out the way she wanted them to. The more she could do a forgiveness prayer, the more that would be allowing her to initiate all of these new beginnings. Does this make sense? And then really going back to, I mean, this is going back to the childhood, but she can go back to the womb, not just in this lifetime, but the womb in general in all ways that you can imagine it. And she wants to, I would be encouraging her to allow her to recognize that she, especially if she's open to reincarnation, okay, then you can just give her the words. Then you can tell her, you are going back to the womb of God. And allow her to recognize, to get her, instead of thinking of this life as an ending and it's all over, you could find the language that would allow her to feel that she's rebirthing in whatever way works for her. Now, can you extrapolate what I said for anybody else in these examples? Everybody's going to have to deal with this womb stuff. Everybody's going to have to deal with all of these relationship issues in the world that did not go the way they wanted them to do, and here's their opportunity to heal.
Can you just say the high road of Saturn in Libra, the high road, for it coming into balance, actually, within the world, what her relationships were, and even, because Saturn in Libra could be a beautiful place to be in.
Yes, definitely, definitely. And you reminded me of a little tidbit. We also look at the archetype of Saturn, Capricorn in the 10th, as a structure of consciousness. We know Neptunian consciousness has no form. Consciousness comes into form via Saturn, Capricorn in the 10th house. So the structure of consciousness, okay? Right now, Saturn transiting Libra, all of us are re-evaluating the forms of our relationships, the structures of our relationships. Here's the other thing that's going to be going on over this entire decade. Saturn makes its 3rd and final last quarter square, crises in consciousness with Pluto, August 21st, correct me, August 21st. between now and 2020, Saturn is in the last quarter phase, or the last quadrant to Pluto. So the realities, Saturn, are going to continue to be crumbling all the way through this decade as it gets closer and closer to Pluto. Big collective mass cycles. Now, for all of us on an individual basis, as Saturn goes through Libra, Scorpio, Sag, to get to Capricorn, individually, we're all going to be re-evaluating relationships this entire decade. Doesn't mean we won't have any, but it means that we've got to be able to adjust all our relationships on a Libra, one-on-one level. You know, in evolutionary astrology, Libra is all types of relationships. Scorpio is the marriage point. So we have to evaluate all friendships, all intimacy relationships, all our conflicts over beliefs relationships, wide spectrum of relationships that are going to have to be adjusted throughout this decade. All right? Is this helping? Okay, good example to help people. How am I on time, Leroy? 35 minutes. Okay, that's good. I can do a little bit on this example, and we'll get through the other two yet. Okay? All right? So some of the other principles with this transiting Pluto in Capricorn in the first house. There has to be a sense of internalized reflection and self-examination, which first house Aries is not always good at. You know the Aries principle, act first, think second. Okay, and so what can happen for this is that these souls are going to be initiating actions that may not turn out the way they want them to, and of course they're going to get reflection from the world and within inside their own emotional body, and that's a good thing. All right? To the degree that these souls can actually quiet down and internalize and process and think about what they want to do before they do it, would be a good thing for Pluto transiting the first house in Capricorn. Again, Pluto transiting Capricorn, all of us are going through an internalization and reflection of our reality that we have lived up to this point. And what do we want to change and do different? To get this Pluto transit in the first house to slow down enough, you'll find that these souls will have these time periods where they just want to crawl into the cave and do the cave thing. And that can be very good. That's men and women, by the way. It can be very good for them to do that. They're going to need to do, who am I? Why am I here? What's the point of everything that I'm doing? What do I want to do with my world? I mean, they are being given a chance to start over, to really rebirth. And that's what you want to encourage through this transit for these souls. It's like you're born again, and you didn't have to go through the birth process again. Now, wherever these Pluto transits are going on, Pluto in Capricorn, because Saturn in Capricorn 10th house is always going to want to suppress. Saturn is that individuated consciousness that wants to keep the lid on the unconscious. Pluto in Capricorn is going to take the lid off. And so each of these 12 transits of Pluto in Capricorn through each of these houses, as it takes that Capricornian lid off, there will be memories that come up. All right? Again, Capricorn's always wanting to stuff the memories, and Pluto's job is to reveal things on the deepest levels possible. So it would be natural for this Pluto transit to have past life memories come up where there was early deaths, where there was beheadings, where there was physical deaths. In Patricia's handouts, you can refer to the things that she says to get some ideas and some of that stuff. All right? Question? Judy?
The archetype that you're describing right now, which is actually what's happening in the sky with the transits, are you saying that subconsciously we're all feeling this particular archetype regardless of where the
No.
planets fall on our chart?
No.
No, you're not.
We're all feeling Pluto in Capricorn. Take the lid off. Something. Person who has Pluto transiting in the first house. There was another question over here. Maureen? Oh, good one. I was actually talking about it when I said that involution and that internal self-reflection, but some people get triggered by the D word. So I haven't said the word. But here's the perspective of evolutionary astrology on depression. It's natural. We all have it. We all go through it. Pluto in Capricorn, natural for us to all go through it. What happens when we get depressed? We go inward. We internalize. We reflect. We look at what isn't working to see what we have to change. So that's what I mean when I'm talking about this. Now this would be something that this would be a very good thing for Pluto transiting this first house to do. To really have an internal reflection on themselves if they get upset or depressed on something. If they get drawn inward. You know, that will happen with first house energy. They're always out there, out there, out there, out there, and then all of a sudden you notice that they've just collapsed in upon themselves. They do that naturally, just with that first house archetype. Sometimes that seventh house polarity, Libra, is just slamming them back into themselves. Sometimes they go in by themselves. Pluto in Capricorn could invite that to go inward more for this house. Okay? But again, when you have long-term chronic depression, there could be multiple things that you need to look at, okay? And then you need to get some professionals involved. I'm talking about depression being something that naturally happens. You have active and passive in the laws of polarity. The passive is going back inward. Depression is going back inward. So take the trigger out of the word. I gave you all permission to say, I'm depressed. Question?
What is it to do when you are the partner of someone who is going through this, through the Pluto on the ascendant, so there's deep confrontation, and at the same time you want to support the person going through the rebirth?
You have to be able to do the seventh house thing, which is flip back and forth as they do it. If you're dealing with somebody who has natal Pluto in the first house, transiting Pluto in the first house, if they're not willing to listen to you, they're not going to hear. So you've got to be able to shift back and forth, that Libra give and take and ebb and flow. And in those moments when they're quieting down and they're ready to listen, that's when you talk. I'm raising a first house Pluto. Question?
Pluto is transiting my husband's first house. It's transiting my seventh.
Oh, there you go. Back and forth. So I need to be conscious of time now, so I want to give some time to the next archetype, okay? All right. So now here's what I want to do. Can you guys all be okay if I do this? If I go Pluto here, and I erase this one, and I go Uranus here, erase this, Saturn here, okay? Saves me paper. Took me a lot of work to make these circles, by the way. So now what we have happening, when we have transiting Pluto in Capricorn, move into the second house, which is the Taurus archetype. Saturn, Pluto, and Venus. All right? What we will have that starts to take place here is major issues over the resources. Major crises over survival, over the ability to take care of themselves. Major crises over all the values. I thought that these things were really important to me, and so all second house Taurus, it is essential needs. It is values. It's how we come up with food, clothing, shelter, but then we go on beyond that into the desires and the whole arts thing, you know, and all the things that we use, all the Venetian things that are beauty and flourishing, those come after the basic needs are met. So when we have this transit going on in here, what we have going on is a real big evaluation over everything in their life, all their possessions, all their values. And what can happen is they disappear. Classic example here could be the consensus state woman whose husband decides he's going to divorce her for a younger woman. And she's left in this crisis of who am I and where's my world and how do I exist in this world with other people? And not only that, he hid all the money in the Bahamas. Okay, so start to get the picture here. We move this into individuated, and it can be more of an internalized process of somebody recognizing, well, I've got this stuff in my life and it doesn't mean anything to me anymore, and I want to run away and play and be free. And I want to go join the commune, you know, and live with people who are coming into the value systems that I am now exploring. Okay? And that blocking effect, especially career-wise, there could be a lot of career stuff involved here because it is an earth house. Okay? And it is a house of survival. So this can be the 10th house cusp is not the only career indicator in the chart. 2nd and 6th have just as much to do with it. Okay? The 2nd is going to be the bare minimum and basics that you need to survive. But as the soul is evolving in consciousness, it's like, what do I want to do that fulfills my soul in addition to just bringing me resources? Okay? So in that individuated state, what we can have going on is these are the souls that, again, are having that whole value crisis going on. And they're letting things go. They're throwing things out. They sell the house. They get rid of the clothes. You know, or they have it forcefully removed if they're clinging to it for security reasons. If they have identified security with the material goods could be removed in order to enforce that internalization of security going on. And that's going to be the ultimate meaning of Pluto Capricorn 2nd house. My source of security is within me. And the ultimate source of security is source itself. So can you see the Plutonian crises that can go on for these types of souls over all of their resources? And depending upon the, consensus is just going to want to try and find another job, or the consensus wife is just going to go off for the next rich husband. The individuated state, they're really going to start in that whole value system thing and deep examination of that. The spirituated state, they're going to recognize somehow, some way, everything I need and desire always shows up for me. Okay? And so then they're going to be dealing, again, with this crisis here with the 5th and the 11th of intense need to want to be free, to play, to be able to explore. And Saturn up here in the 11th is, where's my tribe? Where's my community? Where are all those that look at things like I do, that I feel connected to? And if they're not going over that type of an internalization with their resources, they can feel very fractured off from people up here. Is this making sense? Now, those career blocking effects that'll come from here, again, I kind of described them a little bit earlier. It's those thinking the possessions are the security versus internalizing security. That's going to be the lesson for all evolutionary states. But not all of them are going to have the consciousness to recognize that, to realize that. So one of the things that I would like you guys to work on, homework, is in these handouts that I gave you, and I tried to put a lot of these principles on paper so that I didn't have to be totally responsible for remembering everything. And I could have you guys refer to your notes, okay? So I want you to go through these notes that I've typed out for you, and I want you to continue to ponder and reflect upon these T-squares that I'm talking about for you, okay? And something that I haven't said yet that you also want to be able to look at is because that polarity point of Capricorn is going to be over here in Cancer, okay? All right? And in this case, there's going to be intense emotional confrontations over these resources. In the first house, there's going to be all the confrontations from others and the emotions of others feeling their needs not met. I'm backing up. Capricorn rising, Cancer on the descendant, all the projection onto the partners of meeting their emotional needs. And all of a sudden, the partners are going, I don't want to do that one anymore. And they're thrown back into themselves. Okay? Second house, the resources, okay, down here. The 8th house confrontations are always emotionally based. And they're going to have to confront on emotional levels whatever they feel is limiting them in their life. Question?
Would you say then with the first example, with Pluto being in the first house and the polarity point being the 7th, which is Libra, it's more intensified potentially than with the 8th because you have Libra showing up twice with Saturn being in Libra and then the 7th house?
No. The Cancer polarity confrontations in the opposite house will be intense for everybody. Whatever that opposite house is that has Cancer, it will be an emotional confrontation. Okay? It will also be the emotional enlightenment, the solutions, the answers. Because what happens with Capricorn, Earth and water, opposites on the zodiacal wheel? Earth just wants to be practical, physical. This is how it exists. That's not how it feels. This is how it exists. But that's not how it feels. Water and earth always go back and forth between what we see manifested versus how we feel about it. And you've got to address the emotions. And then when you address the emotions, okay, somebody said it on break. Remember what I said earlier? It starts with consciousness in pure physical and spiritual. And then it condenses into thoughts. And then it condenses into emotions. And then it manifests. So it's very hard to separate that physical and emotional. The Garden of Eden myth has tried to separate spirit and flesh for 5,000 years. It's not working. So it will be as intense in any house. How much time I got left?
20.
Oh, I'm doing good. Is this working? Questions? Okay, what time is it I should ask? Oh, God, am I going over my time? Oh, you're not going to get a break. I got to finish up. All right, so now we're going to go over here, and now we're going to move to the next one. And I'll do it again with the pen just to help you out so you're getting this, okay? So now we're going to go to Pluto archetype in the 3rd house, which is introducing Gemini into the situation. And that's putting, just for simplicity's sake, Uranus in the 6th, Saturn in the 12th. All right? And these are the mutable archetypes that we're going into now. So this Pluto transit in Capricorn, this can, oh gosh, this transit could have souls going into a frenzy. Mercury, left brain, mental. These could be the souls that are like running around with their head cut off, trying to keep that reality going. This is what I've always known. This is how I put it together. But now all of a sudden my reality has to shift. And I have to look at everything from multiple points of view. But I like it this way, Capricorn. And so these souls are just, I mean, this is what I'm going to call the mental whirlwinds. Okay? Because everything's in the mutable houses. And Uranus is over here in Aries and bringing up all kinds of what-ifs and analyzations and all that kind of stuff. And Saturn's over here in the 12th house making sure that reality doesn't work anymore. You know, making sure that any of the fantasies, you know, that we've been carrying around in the mind the bubbles are bursting. All right? And so this is a soul that's really going to have to work with calming themselves down. And that inner reflection is going to have to just find a languaging, some type of words and languaging that says, what is really happening here for me? Why is this happening? They're going to have to carry on multiple conversations with themselves. And they're going to have this Cancer polarity. They're going to have the emotional ahas that'll come in. 9th house, intuition, right brain. And when those emotional ahas come in, they're going to have to go back and quiet down the chaos. All right? And go, listen, even if this doesn't make sense in my world right now, in my head, this is what my heart's telling me. This is what my emotions are telling me. This is how I feel about it. These are the adjustments that I have to make in my world.
That's a 9th house, so that's a Sagittarian
Yes.
reality, so it's our beliefs.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Where are the emotions coming in?
The emotions are the Cancer polarity to Pluto and Capricorn.
Okay, thank you. Within a Sagittarian house.
Yes, within the Sagittarius house.
Okay.
Yes. Remember, Pluto in Capricorn, the objective awareness, the answers, the polarity point are always going to be with Cancer. The way out of this physical situation is the emotional body. It's getting back in touch with the emotions. And we're not taught to honor the emotions in our Western societies. You know, you're supposed to, especially right here with this transit, the head is supposed to overrule the emotions. It can when you look at consciousness to condensation. But in 5,000 years of distortions of natural law, most of the mental stuff that we're trying to get ourselves to override is distorted stuff to the emotional body. So the emotional body, it goes both directions. The physical, emotional, mental, spiritual come back. And so the emotional body can help that mental body see the truth, see the answers. You know, we've been in human consciousness on the planet now for what? 3, 4, 5 million years? That physiological response in the body, you know, Patricia will talk a lot about this stuff. That stuff doesn't lie. And so that's why this 3rd house mental whirlwind has got to listen to the emotional body, because that's where the intuition is going to come through in these transits. Make sense with that? Now, the blocking effect for these people, career-wise, is they're going to run around trying to do everything. This doesn't work. Okay, I'm going to try that. That doesn't work. Okay, I'm going to try this. This doesn't work. Okay, I'm going to try that. They're going to run around and try and do 50 zillion things. And they're also going to have to learn how to go inward, Capricorn, slow down, internalize, because that's where they're going to be able to then have the emotional ahas come through that'll help them focus that direction that they really need to go in rebirthing reality, in rebirthing the career stuff that's going on for them. All right? Career things. I haven't given this tidbit yet. Pluto in Capricorn is a natural time period for people to recognize that my existing career isn't working. Yeah, you can relate. Sometimes in this economy, it gets very hard to then leave your job. Are you kidding? And so what you have to really go inward with all of us have to go inward and listen to what's going on for us in regards to our job, all right? There's a couple of archetypes that happen pretty fast. First of all, there can be what we call, okay, I'll give you my example really quick. I was a receptionist and a customer service rep in my job. It gave me security. I was very good at it. My boss kept throwing money at me. All the while, I was doing 3 to 4 clients a night after work. And finally, I had a very good friend of mine say, do I have to hit you over the head? You know, your boss doesn't want you to leave, so you can have the increased promotions, but you still feel, I can't do this anymore. That's when you have to get that courage to walk away and go in that direction that's getting that positive reinforcement from the universe. Okay? There can also be the situations, again, where you have these things that you want to do that are just not in context to the current reality of where your soul is at. So you have to make peace with this process and this internalization and go, okay, I want to be way over there and I'm over here. What is my step-by-step process, Virgo to Capricorn, in getting there? So Capricorn requires us to totally reinvent our reality while we maintain the current reality. So when that comes to career, we all have to go in these career directions we want to go in while we maintain where we already are. In other words, it's not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, which that first house Pluto transit will do. Okay? That makes sense? In regards to that, I got a tape change thing. I'm going to have to close right now. And so to be continued tomorrow. I want to ask you guys, can we take a short break? We're going to do the mandala opening with Patricia. And then let's do a 10-minute break, and we'll be able to get ourselves back on schedule. Tomorrow we'll be on schedule. Okay? Just the beginning day, getting things opening. Thank you all very much.